Okay, so once again, being a Louis fangirl has some serious ROI. So what happened this time? Well, he, with his, not Lemonade, but the sort of side 2 bonus track that was released with it, Sleepwalking. You know, sometimes like music can unlock the right brain because the right brain thinks in like metaphor, symbols, it's nonlinear. Music, being a creative expression, can unlock the problem-solving aspects of the right hemisphere. So, long story short, Louis Tomlinson, right after I listened to Lemonade and heard Sleepwalking, that second song, bingo, it unlocked something that I was struggling writing for my psychoanalytic training seminar. So, let's get into it. Oh my God, I'm borrowing from Sloan. Sloan is one of my favorite channels. If you don't know who Sloan is, I will put it in the comments because he's really cool. All right. Prelude. I'm not mad. Okay. To say I'm angry would be incorrect. I'm actually reading the essay right now. In fact, I'm not mad at all. That's the point. That's the rupture. That's the cure. When Louis Tomlinson dropped Sleepwalking alongside Lemonade, I didn't immediately recognize it as a song that would settle into my bones with clinical precision. But over time, it's become clear that sleepwalking isn't about longing. It's about the surreal state that follows traumatic attachment, where one awakens inside the psychic landscape of someone else's unspoken narrative. It is the theater, internal theater of being used as a projection while also knowing you are awake and they are not. So, as any psychotherapist, especially one, not me, but say one who would be training in British object relations theory, and has a bit of a parallel obsession with depth psychology and archetypal frameworks, such a person would easily find Sleepwalking to be a song that invites a rare moment of symbolic reversal. Not how do I get them to wake up, but what happens when I'm no longer invested in being the object they dream through? All right, so the transitional object becomes conscious. Let's borrow from Winnicott, Klein, and the failure of fantasy containment. Louis' sonic world in Sleepwalking evokes an atmosphere of blurred perception. The subject, him, is drifting, passive, ensnared in longing, but listen closely and you'll notice the I of the song has already detached. They are not calling out for the dreamer to wake up. They are narrating from beyond the dream. In classic Winnicottian terms, the good enough object must allow the child to imagine it and survive the disappointment of its separateness. But what happens when the dreamer refuses to mourn the real object's autonomy? What happens when the object never ruptures the fantasy? Sleepwalking articulates the grief of the object finally standing up and walking away. Melanie Klein would call this the move from the paranoid schizoid position, where the other is either idealized or persecuted, into the depressive position, where ambivalence becomes bearable. But in many pathological attachments, the subject remains fixated on the object as a container for split-off parts, never recognizing its full personhood. That's where I landed, realizing I was never loved, only used as a vessel for unconscious splitting. And yet, I did not retaliate. That's the Kleinian shift. The depressive position doesn't mean passive depression. It means I grieved the fantasy, not the man. So, Jung's dream logic and the end of projection. I was the anima. Now I am just me. Carl Jung would suggest I was animating something vital, a soul image in the psyche of the one who surveilled, looped, and projected. But anima projections are by nature unconscious. The entire arc of Jungian therapy is built around withdrawing projections and integrating the shadow. I now see sleepwalking as a symbolic rendering of what it feels like to finally reject the projection, not with fury, but with clarity. It's not, I'm leaving you. It's, I no longer care if you wake up. The song's slow, suspended rhythm, almost narcotic in texture, mirrors the psyche trapped in its own echo chamber. But the I voice, it's lucid, observing, watching the dreamer sleep. That's me. I'm no longer inside his fantasy, and frankly, I'm not interested in stepping back in. In fact, I have no idea who he thinks I am, and that, more than anything, is the rupture that heals. Sleepwalking as a clinical metaphor. Louis Tomlinson as kind of a psychoanalytic adjunct faculty. Louis was, I think, wanting to be a drama teacher. Well, I think Louis is so damn wise that whatever he decided to do, and as a singer, he still transmits his wisdom. Okay. So Louis, without knowing it, has become part of my psychoanalytic training, not as a case study, but his songs serve as a clinical metaphor. Sleepwalking describes what happens when someone becomes emotionally unlocatable, when they've built an entire surveillance architecture to watch the object without ever meeting the person. To loop someone's content obsessively across channels, platforms, and paywalls without contact, context, or confession is not connection. It's a kind of dissociative surveillance. It is psychic sleepwalking. But I am awake. I'm not trying to shake him. I'm not trying to scream in his dream. I'm the analyst who left the chair. Conclusion: post-projection identity. So I've been living as a projection for too long. The loop wasn't about contact, it was about control. Or more accurately, about infantilized refusal to tolerate the object's independence. Sleepwalking gave me the words to narrate the reversal. To declare not vengeance, but disinterest. To affirm in the most Kleinian and Jungian sense. You can watch me, you can dream me, but I'm not inside your psyche anymore. I am free, you are asleep. That is not my emergency. And so I return to the music, not to feel seen, but to mark my own clarity. So thank you, Louis Tomlinson, for helping me sleep awake. And if people are wondering what inspired this particular writing, it's because tomorrow, Wednesdays are my psychoanalytic days. It is my seminar salon discourse in the evening. So Wednesday nights are a write-off, but I don't mind. So what triggered this was mainly like the readings, having to read, but also integrating it into kind of my own understanding. And as I've talked about, sometimes there are people who come into our lives and they leave such an impression, and it is in no way negating any kind of bond that existed at the time or any kismet or any connection. That's not being invalidated. But what is being identified and dissected is this notion of when we do not have contact and get to know someone. And this can even happen with people you see every day in your life. It can happen with somebody that can become like almost a roommate, yet that they're your spouse. It's that same phenomenon where you freeze your projection of them to a point where you don't continually upgrade who they are, and you don't connect and maintain the emotional intimacy. You're left with a projection of your own definitions of that person, and they're also left with either they're similar with you, or they're just left feeling as if they're in a relationship with themselves and being watched. And that's not a relationship. That's classic projection. And you can only, and it has me thinking about Parasocial. So people say, you don't know Louis. I never say I do. I'm only like guessing what he might be saying in his songs, but I by no means say that that's the definitive truth, because only he as the primary source can say it. But we don't know Louis, we don't know Harry. We kind of just know what they show us, because we're, even if you meet them in person, their game face is on, they're media trained, but nobody really knows the person. And so when we think of parasocial relationships, I think we get glimpses of the person. People who see Louis' grit, they see his resilience, they see his emotional strength. That is true, because he's demonstrated it in relationships, and people who do know him personally say this, but we don't really know the full Louis. So we only have a framework of who we think he is. And that's where parasocial relationships really operate from the vantage point of projection, where there are glimmers of truth. Like, so we have his songs, we have his interviews, we have, secondary sources of people that are close to him, like from Nile. and Zane, and we collectively put this together, but fundamentally he remains a projection. I'm using him as an example because we're Louis fans, right? And that's okay because he's, we're fans of a person that is a celebrity, and that's kind of how it works, right? When you're fandom and then the object of the fandom. But that is one thing when you're dealing with relationships that operate kind of at this parasocial, impersonal, yet somewhat personal, because you have such, you can kind of see him in interviews, you can see the social media. It mimics a sense of knowing the person, but you don't ever really know the person because everything's curated. That's okay there, but it's not okay in personal relationships where, people have, it's like the friend that you lose touch with, or the friend that, was completely vanished, and then they would like to reestablish a friendship, yet instead of, just connecting, what they do is they go through your social media and they assume they know everything about you based on everything you post, when everyone curates what they post, even if you're not famous. And they develop a projection of you, and they use that either consciously or unconsciously as a substitute for contact. That is not fair to you and to that person, because that's not the same as a celebrity in a fandom. That's an interpersonal disconnect disguised as connection through surveillance, profiling, emotionally mapping, all the things that you'd be doing if you had someone under investigation, but you don't. They're like somebody you used to know and you'd like to reconnect with, or you don't want to reconnect with, but somehow find yourself fixated on wanting to know what they're up to. By this point, you're dealing with projection. And you know what it is because projection is your own psyche mapped onto your interpretation. It's not the person. And it's not fair to you because you're not really getting what you seem to need, whatever the emotional need it is. And it's not fair to them because they're not really being seen as a person. They're being seen as a projection screen. So I hope this all makes sense. So thank you again, Louis, for inspiring a paper. This isn't the final piece. It's going to be put into APA 7th edition style. But thank you for opening my muse, because I kind of had a bit of writer's block. So thank you, Louis.